giving birth to Henry VIII's first son. On the first day of January 1511, a moment of great celebration echoed throughout England as Queen Catherine of Aragon gave birth to a son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall. King Henry VIII, still early in his reign, had longed for a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. The birth of this infant prince, known affectionately as Little Prince Hal, was not only a personal joy for the royal couple, but also a monumental event for the entire nation. Citizens and courtiers alike welcomed the young prince with jubilation, as fires burned in the streets of London, barrels of wine were shared freely, and processions offered thanks to God for his arrival. Despite the revelry surrounding his birth, this sense of hope would be tragically brief. The young Duke of Cornwall lived for just 52 days, leaving behind a tale both jubilant and mournful. Through historical newspapers, we can reconstruct the events of his birth, christening, and early death, along with the bittersweet impact of this short-lived hope on the royal family and the kingdom. From the time of their marriage, King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine had faced enormous pressure to produce a son. An heir was seen as an essential to continue the Tudor line, securing political stability for England and reinforcing the legitimacy of Henry's reign. In early 1510, Catherine conceived, bringing a renewed sense of optimism to the couple, whose early attempts to produce an heir had been met with heartbreak. As the pregnancy progressed, court life began to centre around the Queen's well-being, with the palace carefully arranged to ensure her comfort and safety. As Christmas of 1510 approached, Catherine withdrew to her confinement at Richmond Palace, where she would remain until birth. King Henry chose to celebrate Christmas at Richmond to stay close to her during this critical time, eschewing the traditional grandeur of the season at Westminster. The newspaper describes the king's devotion, noting that he spent the season in relative quiet, his mind focused on the impending birth that could secure England's future. On January 1st, 1511, Queen Catherine gave birth to a healthy son, a child who held the promise of a stable succession. News of the prince's birth spread rapidly through the capital, and the response was immediate and enthusiastic. The newspaper recounts a celebratory mood that gripped the nation. Bonfires were lit in streets, barrels of wine were distributed freely, and processions filled with citizens offering thanks for the prince's arrival were held across London. Even those far from the court felt a sense of connection to this new chapter in England's royal story, taking comfort in the belief that the young Duke of Cornwall represented a secure future for the Tudor dynasty. The court began making arrangements for a grand christening ceremony scheduled for the 5th of January, just a few days after the prince's birth. This short delay suggests a sense of confidence in the infant prince's health, allowing time for preparations to match the magnitude of the occasion. The newspaper highlights the excitement among the nobility and clergy who would be part of the ceremony, their roles as godparents and guests adding prestige to the event. Prince Henry's godparents were carefully chosen to represent both powerful local and foreign alliances. William Warham, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Thomas Howard, Earl of Surrey, served as English godfathers, while Catherine of York, Countess of Devon, was selected as godmother. Catherine of York's connection as the daughter of Edward IV underscored the union of old and new lines within England. It is to be noted that at this time the Queen was great with child, and shortly after this she take her chamber at Richmond, and on New Year's Day, the first day of January, the Queen was delivered of a prince to great gladness of the realm, for the honour of whom fires were made and divers vessels of wine, set for such as would have take in certain streets in London, and general processions thereupon to Lord God. When January the 5th arrived, Richmond Palace was adorned in grand displays of Tudor splendour for Prince Henry's christening. The ceremony itself became a symbol of England's national pride and international alliances. Letters and papers detail the intricate preparations that were made for the event. A 24-foot wide pathway lined with rushes stretched from Richmond Palace to the nearby church, carefully lined with barriers and hung with rich tapestries. The opulent scene extended to the church interior, with walls draped in cloth and the altar area decorated with the finest linens. The magnificence of this path illustrated both the royal family's affection for their son and the elevated status of his birth. The choice of godparents reflected not only the importance of the child's role as an heir, but also the strategic alliances that the Tudors aimed to foster. King Louis of France, though absent, was appointed as a godfather to represent a crucial European connection. His role was symbolically fulfilled by a noble deputy, who presented lavish gifts on his behalf, including a golden salt cellar and a cup, both finely crafted and valued treasures. Alongside him was William Warham, Archbishop of Canterbury, serving as an English religious figure of influence. Representing the godmother's role, Margaret of Austria, Duchess of Savoy, was also honoured. A powerful noble and political figure in her own right, Margaret's role at the ceremony emphasised the strong alliance between England and the Habsburgs. As the days passed, it seemed that Prince Henry would thrive, fulfilling the hopes his birth had inspired. But just 52 days later, on the 22nd of February 1511, the prince died unexpectedly. His passing on the eve of St. Matthias' feast day struck the royal family and the country with profound sorrow. Queen Catherine, whose pride and love for her child had been evident since his birth, was devastated. The newspaper conveys the raw grief of the moment, capturing the sense of loss that permeated the royal court. Although the young King Henry VIII strove to maintain his composure, outwardly managing his grief with restraint, Catherine could not contain her despair. The newspaper suggests that Henry took special efforts to comfort her, likely recognizing the impact that her sorrow would have on both her personal well-being and her position at court. Despite his private mourning, Henry ordered that the young prince be ceremoniously transported to Westminster Abbey, where he was interred with solemn dignity. Courtiers, servants, and clergy alike joined in mourning the young Duke of Cornwall, whose potential as England's future ruler would now remain unfulfilled. Prince Henry's death cast a shadow over the previously jubilant court, marking an end to the brief era of joy he had inspired. After this great joy came sorrowful taunts for the young prince, which was born upon New Year's Day last past, departed this world at Richmond, and from thence was carried to Westminster and buried. The king, like a wise prince, take the glorious chance, wondrous wisely, and made no great mourning outwardly, but the queen, like a natural woman, made much lamentation. The birth and death of Prince Henry, Duke of Cornwall, remain a poignant chapter in Tudor history. For Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, his brief life symbolised both the fulfilment and fragility of their dynastic hopes. In the months and years that followed, the couple continued to face pressure to produce a male heir. Yet Catherine would endure multiple miscarriages and stillbirths, each loss a painful echo of the bright promise that little Prince Hal had once embodied. In the chronicles of Tudor England, Prince Henry's life is remembered as a testament to both the joy and heartbreak of royal lineage. His brief time in the world left a mark on his parents and on the historical narrative of a family whose ambitions would shape an era, underscoring the vulnerability of even the most privileged lives. Through the newspapers and letters, we glimpse the lives of Henry and Catherine, not merely as monarchs, but as parents who loved, lost, and ultimately became symbols of a legacy that would define the Tudor dynasty. The tragic death of Henry VIII's first son. Henry, Duke of Cornwall, was born on the 1st of January 1511 and was the firstborn son of King Henry VIII of England and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. His arrival was initially met with grand celebrations, as he was the prospective heir to the throne. However, he passed away just a few weeks later, and the inability of Henry VIII and Catherine to have another surviving son precipitated issues of succession and marital disputes. These conflicts eventually strained the ties between the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church, ultimately contributing to the onset of the English Reformation. Henry VIII is remembered in history as one of the most ruthless and brutal kings of England. He would do anything to get what he wanted, especially his desire for a male heir. This led him to execute his second wife, Anne Boleyn. However, Henry did have a son before all his marriage troubles started. His first marriage to Catherine of Aragon was initially happy, and Catherine gave birth to a son. If this son had lived, history might have been less brutal, and Henry might not have ended up marrying 6 times. Catherine was first married to Henry's brother Arthur, but she loved Henry, her second husband. Her early pregnancy went well, and following tradition she was confined to a room for the last part of her pregnancy, attended only by women who would help deliver the baby. Childbirth was very dangerous at the time, but Henry and Catherine's early marriage was fruitful and happy. In November 1510, while Catherine was pregnant, Henry VIII participated in a tournament, impressing her with his fitness and organising a grand event with music and dancing to entertain her. Before Christmas that year, Catherine attended Mass with her court and then hosted a lavish banquet. Soon after, she retired to her quarters for the childbirth confinement, during which no men, including Henry, were allowed in. Catherine's chambers were well prepared with beautiful tapestries and paintings to create a positive atmosphere. A font from Canterbury Cathedral was brought in case the baby needed a quick baptism, and on New Year's Day 1511, Catherine gave birth to a son, fulfilling Henry's great desire for a male heir who he hoped would succeed him and continue the Tudor dynasty. For many years to come, people hoped that Henry VIII's son would have many children and keep the Tudor family ruling England. But when the prince was born, London celebrated in a big way. There were bonfires and the mayor gave out free wine to everyone in the city. Next to the Tower of London, cannons fired to celebrate, and the midwife who delivered the baby received a large reward. Catherine of Aragon must have been very pleased with herself because she had successfully given the King of England a male heir. She watched her ladies wash and wrap the baby, who was then placed in a big cradle. Catherine rested in bed and welcomed guests, including her very happy husband, Henry VIII. About 30 to 40 days later, Catherine went back to her usual royal duties, and the baby was named Henry after his father and grandfather. They hoped that one day he would become King Henry IX. When Prince Henry was just 5 days old, he was baptized at the Church of the Observant Friars next to where he was born in Richmond Palace. Important people from the court and ambassadors watched the ceremony. The baby was named the Duke of Cornwall, and his godparents were the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Earl of Surrey, and the Earl and Countess of Devon. Celebrations spread across Europe, with the King of France sending gifts and ambassadors from Spain, where Catherine was originally from, bringing good wishes and congratulations. After her rest, Queen Catherine rejoined King Henry, and they went to Westminster Palace. Meanwhile, their son, Prince Henry, the Duke of Cornwall, stayed in the royal nursery under the care of his nurses, though his parents often visited him. King Henry then organised another tournament to celebrate his son's birth on the 12th of February 1511. He challenged men to beat him in the tilt-yard, and the event was filled with grand displays, celebrating the court's wealth and the king's happiness. The Queen and her ladies watched from a special enclosure decorated in gold and purple velvet, featuring the initials of Henry and Catherine. That evening, another big party and banquet took place, marking one of the happiest times in Henry and Catherine's marriage. But the joy didn't last. Although plans were made to name Prince Henry as the Prince of Wales, a tragedy struck 52 days after his birth. The young prince died in the royal nursery at Richmond Palace. The exact cause of his death is unknown, but it was common during the Tudor period for children to die young, possibly from something like sudden infant death syndrome. Queen Catherine and King Henry VIII were devastated. A funeral was held for the prince at Westminster Abbey. At the time, the etiquette determined that the king and queen did not attend the funeral in person, so they relied on trusted courtiers to perform the ceremony for them. His small coffin was carried from Richmond Palace down the River Thames on royal barges draped in black. The procession was a sombre event, and everyone wore black. The coffin, carried by 6 knights, was escorted into the abbey by monks after a short ceremony, and Prince Henry was buried near the chapel of Edward the Confessor. This tragedy deeply affected English history. Catherine and Henry tried to have more children, but Catherine faced more tragedies with childbirth. This led Henry to seek other relationships, such as with Anne Boleyn, who later gave birth to Mary I, known as Bloody Mary. When the new high altar was being constructed in the 1860s, a small lead coffin of a child was found in the northern part of the step in front of it. This may have been the young Henry's coffin, but it was not disturbed, and there is no marker. Henry VIII's complex personal life would lead England through a time of executions, religious turmoil, and brutality. The death of Prince Henry was one of the most tragic events in King Henry VIII's life, and the grand celebrations after his birth had shown great hopes for his future, but these were dashed with the death in the nursery. Thank you for watching. Please leave your comments below.